Dorothy Sayers and C.S. Lewis, literary and theological giants with a friendship few know about. Let's talk about it with Gina Dalfonzo.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
And we are so glad you're here. You always have a place at our table. I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. Matthew Porter, the executive producer, is here. If Matthew looks a little sad, well, it's because he was yet again passed over to be the next Supreme Court justice. And
it happens.
I'm so sorry.
You were this close.
Our producer Jinx is working hard in the little glass booth. Now that it's fall, pumpkin spice lattes are back, and Jinx can't wait for his next opportunity not to have one.
Yes, I cannot believe that you remembered that. It's been a year now.
You matter, Jinx. You matter.
Yeah, we care about you, and we listen and value your
I don't want pumpkin in my coffee. I don't want pumpkin in my beer.
What would Jinx drink?
Our video director and IT guru, John Myers, is in his tech bunker. John has been studying the original Hebrew and Greek texts to see if people who hack websites can get to heaven. Sure, they're going to hell, but he's checking. Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life, and yes, for those of you who have asked, his doctorate is real. In fact, he's on call 24/7, ready to perform a cachectomy. This is so bad, I can't even read it whenever it's required. And Kathy Wyatt.
Wait a minute. Perform a what? Perform a what?
Cachectomy.
A cachectomy. It's a part of your body sort of close to your wallet.
Matthew.
It's very complicated. Don't worry about it.
Kathy Wyatt is, of course, the soft, feminine side of the program. Look for Kathy's new C.S. Lewis inspired cookbook. It's titled The Glory of Weight. I love that line. I'm going to, Matthew, I'm
going to retire.
When you wrote that.
I'm out.
I don't think he can top that one.
What?
I said, I don't think he can top that one.
No, that's true. That makes up for the other
one of
things that he writes sometimes. Gina Delfonzo is an author, a columnist at Christ and Pop Culture, founder and editor of Dickensblog. She holds a BA from Messiah College and MA from George Mason University. Gina's writing has been published everywhere, from The Atlantic to Christianity Today to National Review. And her latest book, which I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers, is Dorothy and Jack, The Transforming Friendship of Dorothy L. Sayers and C.S. Lewis. Gina, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I absolutely love this book. I was telling Gina off the air that I love to give Mere Christianity to pagans who are asking questions, and it's a helpful book. But I always have to caution them when they read it about C.S. Lewis and his views of women. They're sometimes, well, they sound kind of demeaning, and I have to say that was another culture, another time. You have to cut him some slack and get to the really important stuff. But Gina, your book has straightened me out. I know exactly what to say from now on. And so with impunity, I will recommend Mere Christianity to my pagan, atheistic, shallow friends. And I won't have to do the caution. I'll just say, And if you're bothered by some of his views on women, you ought to get a hold of Gina's book, Dorothy and Jack. And, that's not what it's all about, but it is an absolutely great and delightful book. And you guys, especially if you like Lewis or Sayers, you won't be able to put it down. Every paragraph is a revelation of some stuff that I've never thought about. And when you're as old as I am, it's rare to have something one has not at least thought about on occasion. Gina, I suspect that most everybody who is watching or listening right now knows who C.S. Lewis is, but they may not know Dorothy Sayers, and they should, and consider themselves uneducated if they don't. However, I think probably we ought to remedy this situation with you saying a little bit about both of these people.
Well, as you say, for Christians in particular, we're very familiar with Lewis still today because of the Narnia Chronicles, which are still so well loved by children and adults, the Screwtape Letters, Mere Christianity, as you mentioned before, and just so many wonderful books that he wrote. Sayers is best known still for the detective series that she wrote, the Lord Peter Wimsey Mysteries, which in her day she was considered one of the best writers of the golden age of mysteries, and she still is. She's right up there with Agatha Christie. Personally, I think she's better than Agatha Christie, and there are some who agree with me. But she did so many things. Even besides that, she was a playwright, she wrote essays, she wrote a lot of works of Christian apologetics, and she also translated Dante's The Divine Comedy. So she was a very multifaceted writer, as Lewis was too.
Incredibly brilliant and different. I mean, she's out of the box, and she's blunt. And if you didn't want to know what she thought about something, just don't ask her. In this, we live in social media times, and if you ask most people who never go out because they're afraid they're going to die from the virus, do you miss your friends? And they say, oh, no, I have millions of friends on Facebook. And they probably made them within a 60-second span of saying liked or accept or be my friend. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't the way it was with Lewis and Sayers. It started kind of slow, didn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it started through letters. She was a famous writer at the time, and he was just starting to become known as a writer. This was 1942. And she wrote him a fan letter, which meant a great deal to him as being the first fan letter he got from a famous person. And so he wrote back. They had a lot of interests in common, and they established a friendship that way through correspondence. But I've sometimes said that they would have been pretty good on Facebook because they they were fine with this sort of friendship where you don't really dig into the personal stuff right away. You just talk about all the things you have in common. They like that kind of friendship. And yet with a real friendship, eventually you do get to the personal stuff. And it took them a while, but they finally did get there. So this friendship with each other, I think it sort of broadened and deepened their notions of what real friendship is and how encouraging and helpful and supportive it can be.
They weren't even on a first name basis for a long time.
Right.
Right?
That's right. Yes. And it took years. And finally, he had just been given an honorary doctorate. And so she was sort of joking about, what do I call you now? And he said, well, just call me Jack as everybody else does. He said, it's, years have gone by. I think it's time. So at that point, they became on a first name basis.
Had they met yet? I mean, they didn't get together very often.
Not very often, but once in a while they did get to meet. They lived a couple of hours apart. They were both very busy with work and with various obligations and commitments, but they did get together every once in a while for lunch or for activities. going to different meetings and things at Oxford. And they loved getting together when they could, and they always wished they could have gotten together more often.
Because I know where the minds of our listeners and viewers go in this kind of discussion, we probably ought to get it dealt with here and now and right away. Were they sleeping together?
No, they were not. There was never any kind of thing like that going on in their friendship. It was, she was married and he was a bachelor for most of their friendship, but eventually he got married too, which she was very supportive of. I think she thought it would do him a lot of good, and it did. And no, they were purely platonic friends.
Oh, man. I'll tell you, on the other side of the break, I have so many questions. We could spend 5 or 6 hours just talking about your book and some of the behind-the-scenes things that took place. But mainly it's about friendship and the importance of friendship when it's real and it's authentic and it makes a difference. And in both of their lives, and they weren't just worshiping at each other's altar, they were honest about criticism, honest about how they felt, and honest about Jesus. And we're going to have some more on the other side of the break. The book, Dorothy and Jack, The Transforming Friendship of Dorothy L. Sayers and C.S. Lewis. Don't you go away. We're so glad you're with us. You're listening to Steve Brown, etc. And our guest is author Gina Dalfonzo, and her book is called Dorothy and Jack, The Transforming Friendship of Dorothy L. Sayers and C.S. Lewis. And you ought to get this. This is just a fun read, and you'll enjoy it. Even if you're not familiar with Lewis and with Dorothy Sayers, this would be a good introduction. I would give a finger to never have read Lewis or Sayers and to have that initial discovery in my life if I could go back. So get the book and read it. You'll like it.
Gina, my question has a couple of little facets to it. How familiar were you with these two individuals that would make you decide that you wanted to do a book about this relationship? Was it something that you were really familiar with both of them as writers, and you knew about the fact that they had a friendship, or were you completely unfamiliar? And then as you began doing your research, were there things that you discovered that really surprised you as you delved into this relationship?
I had been familiar with them for quite some time. They're actually two of my favorite writers. I started reading Lewis a little bit in high school, and then when I got to college, I took a course on Lewis and some of the writers who were associated with him. So, for instance, Tolkien, George MacDonald, G.K. Chesterton, and Sayers was one of those. So that's when I first read her, and when I started reading more Lewis, and I just loved them both so much, loved their writing, started to read more and more of it, all I could find at the college library. And ever since then, I've been a great fan of both. And this friendship, I like to say, it was sort of hiding in plain sight because people generally knew that they were writers who were associated with each other, who knew each other. But I found that a lot of people don't really know all about the friendship and how long they were friends, how deep their friendship went, how much they encouraged each other and meant to each other. So, it was something that I had just, discovered in the course of reading their works and reading their letters to each other, and just wanted to share with people because I found it so wonderful and fun to read about, and I wanted other people to be able to enjoy it too. So you asked about surprises. at this point, having been reading them for so long, there weren't a whole lot of surprises left. But there was one thing. I wrote some things about Charles Williams in this book, who was a fellow Inkling of Lewis's, and he was a friend of both Lewis and Sayers. So I had some sections about, their friendship with him and his influence on them. And I knew that Williams was sort of interested in the occult. I didn't know quite how interested until I really started diving into it for this book. So that was kind of a surprise, not the most pleasant one. Williams was quite a compartmentalizer, if I can use that word.
Another word would be hypocrite.
You can use that word as well. He not just Lewis and Sayers, but practically every Christian Williams knew thought he was this wonderful saintly person. They didn't know he was very carefully hiding some occult activities that he didn't really want his Christian friends to know about. So the things that he did in his Christian life, Lewis and Sayers were very drawn to, but they didn't know what was going on behind the curtain. And I think it probably would have astounded them if they knew. Little bits started to leak out eventually, and they were pretty astounded just by those little tiny bits, but they didn't even know the half of it. So that was rather surprising, that whole thing.
Didn't Dorothy Sayers kind of worship at Charles Williams' altar? I mean, he was her mentor, wasn't he?
To an extent. He really got her interested in reading Dante. And as I said earlier, she became such a great fan of Dante that she ended up translating him and teaching herself Italian in order to translate him, which was a huge work. And that all started with Williams, and she had hoped that he would continue to be a mentor and guide to her as she did that. But Williams actually ended up dying before that could happen. And so Lewis sort of took that spot for her. It was good at that point that she had that friendship with Lewis, because he ended up being a help and a support to her in that. And as it happened, Lewis, being a very sincere Christian and a very real and good friend, I think in the end was a much better friend to her than Williams ever could have been.
Mm-hmm. I had read that Sayers was kind of reluctant about stepping into the space of being an apologist. What was the thinking? What was the heart behind that? Did Lewis encourage her any in that specific regard?
He did, and I think that helped. And they did bicker over it quite a bit. And she felt it wasn't her primary calling. She felt she had a gift of telling stories, a gift of writing plays, and she was quite happy to do that, and to let her faith come into it sometimes. But she wasn't a big fan of writing specifically apologetic work or of corresponding with atheists, which she ended up doing a lot. So some of her complaints about that I quote in the book, and they're kind of funny. She would tell Lewis, you like souls, I don't. You like doing this work, I don't. I hate this, and God is just taking advantage of the fact that I can't stand intellectual chaos, which I got a kick out of. But Lewis gently sort of kept saying, you're very good at this. This is worth doing. You're doing it well. He even put that into her eulogy. She didn't want to do this, but she did it well. And so I think he really, really helped her with that.
The back and forth comments of the two in terms of art being propaganda is very interesting. And if you haven't thought about that before, this book will make you think some. Can you write a story that has something that you want to communicate as a believer to unbelievers, or does it lose its credibility immediately when you do that? And you'll get a bunch of good stuff in this book on that particular subject. George, you had a question. You want to state it, and then we'll have
actually, it was kind of extending the same theme. I mean, in the post-war, they were sort of feeling like they had to be the go-to commentators on everything with a little Christian message in it. And as you're saying, Sayers kind of resisted that. So I was interested in kind of continuing that discussion some.
All right, we'll do that on the other side of the break. Guys, this is really hard work, so we got to rest up. We also, as another motive, need to make a buck. So we're going to back out, but like Jesus, we're coming back. Hey guys, thanks for hanging out with us. If you like this program, check out our weekly email. It's free and a bargain at twice the price. Just go to keylife.org/subscribe.
Gina, we were talking before the break and kind of extending some of the conversation. Jack and Dorothy sort of got to be in the post-war society kind of go-to consultants for the media, different publications and so forth, as sort of reference Christians to make Christian commentary on whatever topics of the day. And it seemed like, they felt that sense of obligation to contribute to sort of rebuilding the post-war society. And C.S. Lewis seemed to accept that in a context of a broad range of topics, but Dorothy really resisted that. You make a comment, in fact, that she had a positive horror of bad work done in a good cause, and kind of relates to what Steve was talking about. But can you talk a little more about, and then you make reference to perhaps modern Christian filmmakers might take a point from that. How did their discussion really inform perhaps the issue of art and Christians and trying to represent Christ in art?
Well, you use the phrase a broad range of topics, and that's really key because at the root of their conflict over this was that Dorothy was a great believer in writing what you felt called to write, called by God, if you were a Christian, as she was. And she thought that was the way to do the work you were meant to do the work you were best at doing, and to do truly good work. And Lewis was a little bit inclined to take on any project and any topic if somebody said, "Oh, a Christian ought to be talking about this," and he was happy to put his hand up and volunteer. And she thought that was not the best way to go about it, because then you end up talking about all kinds of things that maybe you're not fully equipped to talk about, and you end up maybe giving people a wrong impression of faith or of whatever topic you're talking about. So they did go back and forth a lot about that. But as far as, doing Christian work in the post-war world, I mean, both of them did feel a sense of obligation about that. They felt like, here we are in a Christian society, nominally Christian, but the whole world plunged into World War II and terrible atrocities happened and terrible things went on. And we need to sort of take a step back and look at the world and say, okay, something went wrong. Christians have a responsibility to see what they can do, to trace what went wrong, to try to help put it right. So both of them did feel a sort of duty in that respect.
Maybe similar now.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, it is.
Through the whole thing, but as your title states, the transforming friendship. At what age did it start? And then, like, how long did the transformation take? And what was some of the things that transformed in the transformation?
Well, it started in 1942 and lasted about 15 years, so until Sayre's death in 1957. And I would say that Lewis did have a few female friends, but she was one of the best female friends that he had, and having lived largely in an all-male world most of his life, or mostly male world, it just helped broaden his perspective a little bit, learn about different points of view from his own, and just, I think it was a mind-broadening experience for him. And for her, I think it sort of helped transform the way she looked at her role as an apologist and her duty. I think it helped keep her on that path when sometimes she may have been tempted to just give it up and go do the things that she really wanted to do. So I think for both of them, it just really broadened their minds, gave them a lot of encouragement, a lot of support. Lewis had the Inklings, of course. We all know about the Inklings, Tolkien and the others, but there weren't really any other apologists in the Inklings, not to any great extent. They were mostly doing creative writing. So Sayers and Lewis were sort of these iconic apologetic figures in the world, sort of feeling more and more alone in that role as they went along. And in that they could reach out to each other and have somebody who knew exactly what they were going through and feel that support and just know they weren't alone, which I think meant a lot to both of them.
Very cool.
Gina, when we get back, I'd like you to say a little bit about the Inklings. That kind of ran out of steam there toward the end, and it was not the place of succor and encouragement that Lewis had often found there. And in Jean's question, the transforming friendship, Dorothy Sayers kind of substituted for that, and that was a surprise to me, and I'd be interested in some of your comments on that.
Sure.
And by the way, if anybody asks you what you're listening to, you tell them Steve Brown, etc. Then turn your nose up and let your peacock feathers fly in the breeze and say, "And you're not?" We're talking with Gina Delfonzo. The book, and you ought to get it, is Dorothy and Friends. Don't go away. You're listening to Steve Brown, etc. And contrary to my, I'd like to say it was on purpose, and that way you can cover your posterior, but it was just an outright, I blew it. The title of the book is not Dorothy and Friends. It's Dorothy and Jack. Dorothy L. Sayers and C.S. Lewis. And it's transforming friendship, and you ought to get this book, and you'll like it. Before the break, I had mentioned that you had mentioned that the Inklings, which is a group of men who encouraged each other and read each other's stuff to each other, and I've been in that bar, by the way, but it ran out of steam sort of toward the end when Williams died and some other things happened. And Dorothy kind of became a substitute. Is that right?
In a way, she did. Lewis stayed friends with those men, but the group itself started to fizzle out, as you say. They had always appreciated that they could get together and just freely criticize each other's work. And Lewis really liked that for the most part. He liked that he could criticize other people's work. They could criticize his, and he believed that ultimately made the work better. But as time went on, some of the criticism I think it started to wear on some of them. Tolkien, I think, got tired of people criticizing The Lord of the Rings. Lewis loved it, of course, and did all he could to encourage Tolkien, but the other guys kind of wore him down. And then Lewis, in turn, was a little hurt that Tolkien was kind of anti-Narnia and just had all kinds of things that he didn't like about it. And with one thing and another, the group, as a group, just sort of started to fall apart and stop meeting at their regular times and in their regular place. So I think it did help Lewis then, again, that he had that friendship with Sayers. They could still talk to each other about their work, and they could still be critical when they wanted to, but they also had a deep respect for each other's work and for what each other was doing. And Sayers really liked Narnia. She told him, she told him that she liked it, and she even wrote a letter to the editor of a newspaper defending him when somebody got his theology all messed up. She wrote to the editor and set them straight. So I think it sort of soothed some old hurts for him, and so even though he didn't have the Inklings anymore, he did have friends that he could talk to, and she was one of them. And I think she helped him a lot in that.
Gina, the thing that struck me most was what you say in the notes, cross-gender, male-female friendship, platonic friendship. And it's such a beautiful thing, but that's never, we just don't really espouse it. We don't really, it's never really promoted these days. You have, obvious reasons. But it seems like there's some value there. Is that something that could really only have occurred in a time and place where they're literally 2 hours from each other and there's no internet, and there's no texting and stuff? So you cut out a lot of the bad stuff. I mean, what did you learn about that dynamic in the course of writing this book?
Right. Well, it's never easy because we're all aware of the temptations and the dangers that can go along with it. But I think sometimes when that's all that we're aware of, then we do miss out on the value that can be there. And I think it just helped a lot that they had such a deep respect for each other as persons, as fellow Christians, as people made in the image of God. Lewis writes somewhere, it may be in The Weight of Glory, I'm not sure, about how all day long we're either helping each other to heaven or to hell. And so your neighbor is the holiest object presented to your senses, and you have this tremendous responsibility for your neighbor. And he really did look at life that way. He was very sincere about that. And so I think that helped him a lot to look at other people, to look at women, to look at everybody as his neighbor, as someone he had a responsibility to treat well and to look at through the eyes of Christ. And, to bring up Williams again, Williams did not have that kind of view. In comparison, he looked at people and especially looked at women as people, as things that were there for his use and his benefit. And that's very dehumanizing. And that allows you to fall danger to all kinds of temptations, to prey on people, to exploit people, to end up having emotional affairs with women, as Williams sometimes did. So, I think that the way that they saw each other, just with respect and through the eyes of faith, I think that helped a lot.
There, and this, we don't have much more time, but it needs to be at least mentioned that Dorothy and Lewis, Sayers and Lewis, both had some parallels in their personal life. With Lewis, it was with his friend's mother, whom he took in and who was very, very difficult. And with Sayers, it was her husband, Mac, who could be he was depressed, he could be a pain, he was critical, he was jealous. Did those parallels bring them together?
Well, it's as I said earlier, it took them a while to get to talking about some of the personal stuff in their lives. But I think that for both of them, friendship was sort of a relief from the difficult relationships and obligations that they had to take care of in their personal lives. And Lewis was very faithful to his commitment to care for Mrs. Moore until the end of her life. But he would privately admit that it was very, very hard. And Dorothy's marriage was very, very hard. But they were both people who the kind of people who would take on a commitment and see it through and be faithful to their obligations. But it wasn't until later that they started talking. I don't think it was until after Mac's death that Lewis told her that, my brother is an alcoholic. And she said, yes, my husband was also an alcoholic. And I know it's hard. And so I think they did. They finally managed to get to the point where they could support each other in that. But even before that, I think their friendship was a relief and a help.
Yeah. Gina, I hope we can do this again. Are you working on something now?
Well, I've got another book that just came out, which is called The Gospel in Dickens with Plough Publishing. So I'm running around telling people about 2 books at once, which is a wild ride.
Listen, I love the book. You guys need to get it. It's a great read, and you'll see things you haven't seen before. And Gina, thank you so much for taking your time to be with us. You're a delight. And this conversation was lots of fun.
Well, thank you so much.
Guys, we're going to back out. And when we come back, we're going to tell you who we're going to do it unto next week. The name of this book is Dorothy and Jack. Dorothy L. Sayers and C.S. Lewis. And it's about their transforming friendship. Hey, it's been a great hour, and we're glad that you were with us for this hour. Great conversation. We need to be reminded sometimes of people who have gone before us and their faithfulness without worshiping at their altar. The trouble, and if you have these books in your library on famous Christians, burn them. They do no good. They're lying. If they don't tell you the dark side and the sin side, then those books aren't very helpful. They set up a model for you that you can't follow. So Christian biographies, when they do that, you just shouldn't listen to them. But when a book comes out that talks about people who were faithful and flawed, it is a great encouragement to those of us who are trying to be faithful and are certainly flawed. And this book, Dorothy and Jack, does that. I mean, when you finish, you think, Dorothy, I don't know if I would have established a friendship with her, and I would have liked to have been with Lewis, but there are times I wouldn't want to be around him. But the fact of their biographies being mainly one of faithfulness is an amazing and wonderful thing. So when you find a biography that tells you the truth, and the Bible comes to mind, read it. Remember God's grace, and then say, Lord, if you could keep me here faithful, that would be so good. And you'll be surprised at how often that's true, even with your flaws. Thus, into the sermon. Kathy, who's going to be next week?
Well, next week we do not have an author. Go figure. What happened? But one of our board members at Key Life gave us some information about a gentleman, Rob Michaels, who is the CEO and founder of an organization called Serve and Protect. And that's an organization that reaches out to first responders, trauma, people that work in trauma, police, all of that. And evidently, as he started it back in 2011, and it's grown and grown and grown considerably over the years. So we're going to talk to him about that outreach to people who are continually reaching out to everybody else and have gone through some significantly difficult times. And so I think it'll be a good conversation.
We'll have great stories next week.
Yes.
It's our fond hope that you'll join us next week. Same time, same place. Between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. That, of course, gives you a wide, wide berth.